Boss battles within product design and game design are an excellent way to sort of cap off a collection of tasks to make sure that the user has retained the information properly, understands the information, and is ready to move on to the next group. These can be a significantly more fun or entertaining way to validate that information than a test or a quiz. These types of challenges can be particularly effective for the Hexad Achiever and Player archetypes, which allows them to brag about beating the toughest things with minimal help, or just who can get through things in the quickest amount of time. There are a lot of different flavors with boss battles though, and we're going to talk about a few of them using one of my favorite games of all time, Castle Crashers. Just as we mentioned, boss battles are a great way to test a user's knowledge, strength, retention, or any of those sorts of things when it comes to game or product design. But there's a lot of different ways you can handle boss battles. There's a lot of different strategies, types, and methods that you can use. I specifically love the way that Castle Crashers does these types of encounters and random tasks because they mix it up. None of the bosses in this game feel the same, and there's a lot of them. This isn't like a small handful of bosses. Castle Crashers has, I want to say 20 or so boss battles, and every one feels unique and different, despite the game itself only having 3 mechanics. So let's talk a little bit about the different types of boss battle strategies we can use in both product design and game design. The first one that comes to mind is generally what a lot of people refer to as the bullet sponge. This is really just the same as you've been using the entire game. It's kind of like just a bigger, beefier version of what you've been doing. Just something that can take more bullets or more attacks or more magic or whatever it is and just ramps it up. There's not a lot of creativity here, and generally players consider this type of boss boring, a little bit lackluster. It doesn't really require anything new. You see this a lot, especially in old school games, like side-scrolling beat-em-ups, where you get to the end of a level, and it's really just one of the minions that you've been fighting the entire level, and it just scales up in size and beefs up its health. And it's really just more of the same. I've just got to fight, hit him more times or beat him up more, whatever it is. And these just generally aren't as fun. If we're talking about something like a learning and development kind of program or some other task, this is kind of the equivalent of like a multi-choice test at the end of the quarter, rather than just doing something new and putting your test of knowledge in a different form. You're really just taking all of the quizzes throughout the entire term or quarter or whatever it is, and just cramming them into one big test. And these are boring, they're repetitive, they don't feel like anything new, but it is a way to sort of cap off that understanding. And you see these especially early in games, like with Castle Crashers, the Barbarian boss is kind of this. He definitely has some new attacks, but really it's just a beefier version of kind of what you've been fighting. The next logical step from here, like I mentioned with that Barbarian boss, is giving these bosses new or unique mechanics, something that's a little bit different than what you've been seeing. Maybe it's a different attack, maybe they have the ability to recharge their health, like once they get to a certain level, they do a recharge that can kind of catch you off guard. Maybe they have a special attack, like a ranged attack, when all the minions you've been fighting are hand-to-hand combat or melee or something like that. Maybe they get a ranged attack, or maybe they have an attack that freezes you, like the ice boss in Castle Crashers, or some other type of effect attack, fire, acid, something like that, or an area of an effect attack where they're damaging 3 or 4 different players with a single attack. You can also see they maybe have potentially different special movement. They can fly, they can move faster than you, they can swim, they have spin attacks, something like that, some type of movement that makes them different than what you've been doing, or they potentially just have some type of block where other enemies might not be able to block your attacks. They maybe have some sort of shield or the ability to just put their hands up and kind of block an attack. Lots of different ways you can change this with unique mechanics that aren't necessarily a complete overhaul of the system. You might also see one of the things you see a lot with bosses is minion spawn, where you're fighting this boss, but then they also have the ability to shoot off these minions that you have to fight separately. This is one of my favorite bosses in Castle Crashers, is the sort of like big fuzzy creature that spits out the little fuzzy balls that you've got to fight all of them off while you're still trying to get hits on that other major character. Sticking with the L&D space, this is kind of maybe like an end-of-term essay as opposed to the multiple choice quiz, where we're taking the same ideas. You might have the same information that would be part of a multiple choice question list, but instead you're asking someone to do it in a little bit different way. In that L&D space, you're kind of changing that lateral thinking where it's like, okay, I understand the information, and I've done my flashcards or I've done whatever to retain this information, but now I'm asking you to switch it up a little bit, and instead of just being able to choose from a selection, I need you to critically think about information and think, okay, I've done this before, I know this information, but how can I put it into a real world context? Or how can I use what I've learned and use it in a different way or frame it in a different mentality? And that's kind of the equivalent of what these boss battles would be in a learning and development space. One of the other types of boss battles you see a lot is a testing of a specific mechanic. You see this especially, the Legend of Zelda series is famous for this, especially the ones in the late 90s, early 2000s, the Ocarina of Time, Majora's Mask, Skyward Sword, Twilight Princess. You earn this item in a dungeon. Maybe it's the boomerang or the hook shot, or the one that I love, I think it's Twilight Princess that has the like spinning disc. And to master that item that you just unlocked in the dungeon, the boss for that dungeon heavily requires that mechanic. Instead of being that bullet sponge that we mentioned or having unique and special mechanics, you're really honing in on the like, hey, have you mastered this single item that you earned in this dungeon? And you see that a lot just to make sure that as you're exiting that dungeon, as you're going back out into the real world, or you're going to get to the point where you're starting to put this mechanic to heavier use, you really understand it. And they give you a boss battle to test that knowledge and make sure, hey, before I leave this dungeon or before I leave this safe space, this experimental space, I need to make sure that as a player, you know how to use this item, because moving forward in Metroidvania style, like I may need that item to get to new areas of a map or get to new exploratory areas. And I need to be able to make sure that you've mastered that skill before you move back out. And you see that a lot, like I said, with the Legend of Zelda as an example. Some of my favorites from those, like I love like the original Legend of Zelda, the Dodongo boss, really learning to use bombs and trying to get this idea of like, hey, I've got to place this bomb down. It's the like classic adage of like, you shouldn't have shot where I was, but you need to shoot where I was going to be. And putting those bombs down, you've really got to anticipate Dodongo's movement and think like, okay, I've got to lay this bomb down right in front of him so that he swallows it, and it kind of blows up inside of his stomach. And utilizing those bombs in that way really got you to think about how bombs worked, and kind of took bombs beyond this realm of just simply using them to blow up walls and secret areas, and using them as an attack strategy, using them to place them and attack characters, which is kind of a unique mechanic for bosses in The Legend of Zelda and within that original game. Looking at a learning and development space, again, we're going to kind of stick with this theme. This might be more of like, this is the equivalent of like a final project, where instead of just being able to recite information or put it to an essay, you're really getting in and doing. It's kind of going beyond the understanding and the repeating of information and really putting it to a real world use. Hey, do I understand this beyond the flashcards, beyond the being able to write a paper or something about it? Can I put this into the real world? Can I tackle a real world problem with the knowledge that I've learned? And that's really what you get to with these boss battles, where you're using a very specific mechanic. It's more about, hey, I know how to use this item. Like, sure, I press B and this item gets used. I understand that. but can I really use that lateral thinking and try to understand, like, okay, what are the different ways I might be able to use this? What are the different ways in Castle Crashers? How can I use my magic to get to someone? And you see this, like, I love the lava world boss for this, where you're kind of fighting on two fronts. You kind of have a sock puppet up in the top, and you have these like other characters around, and you've got to kind of learn, like, hey, can I use vertical attacks combined with magic, combined with melee? You really have to start putting these different mechanics to use in a different way than you have with the other bosses. And this is probably, like, in my opinion, this is one of the hardest bosses in the game, because you do have to get that, like, you have to get vertical to be able to hit that boss on the ground. And it makes for a whole different challenge. And really, before you move to, like, what is the second half of Castle Crashers, you've kind of got to prove, like, you have an understanding of both magic and melee and ranged attacks and that sort of verticality of space, which is a really interesting and new way to handle those battles. One of the classic game tropes within boss battles themselves is stages or forms, like where the boss enters different forms. You maybe fight him once, then you think you've got him beat, and he upgrades or refills the health or does something that kind of changes that battle. He goes from being a on the ground creature to now he flies, or he goes from someone that's vulnerable to a certain attack and now he has immunity to that certain attack. And those stages happen, and it's a great way to basically be able to test multiple things at once, because you can kind of have those different forms in one boss battle, and it can really, being combined, can really make it feel like an epic moment, because not only do you think I've got him beat, I've got the boss beat, that's the end of it, you kind of get snapped back out of that really quick and have to sort of fight for your life again. But it also allows you to layer that and not only say, like, okay, have you mastered melee? Okay, well, now we're going to make the boss, the second form is in the air, so you've got to master range attacks. Or maybe it's like they're in water, so you can use electricity the first time. Okay, well, now I've built an electric immunity and you've got to use something else that second time. And skipping to those different forms can kind of be interesting, and it's a fun surprise. I mean, that the final boss in Castle Crashers is one of my favorites, and there's a spot in there where, like, the chest of gold comes down and you think you've done it, like, hey, I just beat the final boss, and then you open that chest and he pops out. And I remember genuinely, like, getting jump scared at that moment. Like, my kids, like, were genuinely frightened. Like, I remember them letting out a gasp on that spot in that final boss. And you realize, like, oh, we're not done. Like, we're not done with this. I've got to test something else. And now it's a completely different fight. Where it was melee before, now we've got to use ranged attacks. We have to use magic. And it really makes it feel like that final test where it's like, hey, I've got to do a little bit of everything. I've got to use all the different things at my disposal. You see this more and more, where these end of term exams or something like this are less about a single type of exam, and you're really building those layers, that all the different learning styles or all the different potential products have different ways to understand that. So you're kind of appeasing to all the different people that would be applicable to that platform. I choose Castle Crashers for the boss battles, again, just because I think it's so versatile in this game. I think you're really limited to just three mechanics. You can move, you can attack, and you can use magic. And there's different forms of that. Like, there's different types of attack. You have a ranged attack and a melee attack. Magic has a couple of different types. You have a sort of what's the equivalent of a melee magic versus a ranged magic. Movement, you have run, jump is pretty much what it boils down to. There's not a whole lot more than that. Yet every boss fight feels unique. And the humor that they use in these bosses is just classic. Like, the corn on the cob boss is one of my favorites. Like, every time you hit him, popcorn pops off, and that's simple and silly, but the fact that you can run around and eat that popcorn and get life back, like in the food theme, is fantastic. I love the, like, submerged cat boss is one of my favorites. Just be able to, like, you have to find something to float on to stay out of the water because your movement speed is hampered when you're in that water. Again, you're playing with a limited set of mechanics, and movement combat and magic, but you can do a ton of little things with that. You see this in like the ice boss is the same. Like you're on an ice floor and you're kind of slipping and sliding around and he's popping in and out of different areas, and you're forcing the user to really understand that movement mechanic and know like, hey, when I let off that thumbstick, I'm still gonna slide past him a little bit. And you've got to really master those different types of attacks. And I really like what they do with so many of the bosses in this game. I think they're just incredibly unique. They're funny, they're entertaining. None of them feel really like a chore. Like I think there's definitely some that are harder than others, but none of them feel out of place. None of them feel like they are unfun, and they just vary it so much. There's just so many different styles of bosses in this game. And if you're looking at implementing something like this in any of your products or learning and development spaces, I really think it's worth going and checking out Castle Crashers and seeing how they vary the different boss types, really with a limited set. Like I said, 3 mechanics, yet you're getting 20 plus bosses that all feel genuinely unique. So ultimately, when it comes down to implementing a boss battle or that sort of test of knowledge type mechanic, there's really just a couple of things that you want to keep in mind to make these feel fresh and fun. An effective and satisfying boss battle should feel like a unique experience, but not expect your player to do something that they have never seen before. It's really relying on stuff that they've seen and understand, and you're just utilizing it in new ways. If you get put into a boss battle and it expects you to do something that you've never before done in the game, or you've never before done in any of your learning and development experience, it can catch people off guard and leaves kind of that bad taste in the mouth. So use familiarity in new ways. Use the mechanics, information, data, everything they're used to, just in a new light. Make them think laterally a little bit about it and use it in a different way. And not only that, but chain different things together. Maybe take a little bit of this and combine it with this and force a user to do a project that puts them in both spaces and really makes them think about, okay, I haven't maybe done this exact thing, but I have done something similar. And let me recall that information and remember what I did last time. And by doing those two things, you really can make every boss battle feel like a unique and engaging experience without having to introduce new mechanics or introduce new things. And the player can connect those dots themselves, and it feels significantly more rewarding when you do that, as opposed to being told explicitly what you need to do. And that's one of the ways you can make a boss battle or that sort of end of term or end of training synopsis, where you're doing that final exam to check their retention of information. It can really make it feel fresh and unique. Thanks for joining me, and remember to like, subscribe, all that kind of stuff in the videos. If you like this content, doing that allows me to continue making these videos and choose new topics to discuss. So thanks for watching.